In the small town of Kiambu, Kenya, the tranquil atmosphere was shattered by the heinous crime that came to be known as the Lawrence Warunge case. Lawrence Warunge, a 22-year-old university student, found himself at the center of a gruesome murder investigation that shook the nation to its core. Lawrence Warunge was no ordinary young man. Hailing from a relatively affluent family, he was pursuing his studies at Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. Despite his privileged background, there were dark currents swirling beneath the surface of his seemingly ordinary life. The events unfolded in the early hours of January 5th, 2021, when Lawrence's family home in the leafy suburb of Karura became a scene of unspeakable horror. Lawrence allegedly embarked on a killing spree that claimed the lives of his parents, Nicholas Njenga Warunge and Anne Wanjiku, his younger brother, Maxwell Njenga, and cousin, Christian Njenga, their farmhand, James Kinyanjui, and a mason employed at their home. He was inspired by watching a popular show called Killing Eve, and two sets of novels, one named A Perfect Murder and the other Eve on the Perfect Murder, which explained how to execute murders. On the 5th of January 2021, minutes after 8 p.m., Lawrence came near their compound and surveyed the neighborhood, making sure his tracks were covered. He then entered the artisans' compound, which was near to their compound, and found their mason and farmhand, James Kinyanjui, present, as the other co-workers had already retired to their homes. James didn't notice anything awkward with Lawrence, as he was the boss' son. James greeted him, and Lawrence then requested for a metal bar. The mason innocently gave him, not knowing the same object would be used to end his life, and 4 more others. Lawrence clutched the metal bar firmly, tensed, as he knew the mason was going to be his first victim. The mason noticed him shaking and asked him if he was all right, and said he was tired. As soon as the mason, James Kinyanjui, turned his back on him, Lawrence struck him heavily on his head, and when he fell down, Lawrence then pounced on him, slitting his throat with his knife. A few minutes later, his father drove into their compound, which was near the mason's compound, as he was coming from work. When Lawrence heard him, he jumped through a barbed wire fence to their compound. In the compound, he went straight to the backyard, where he saw his mother, Anne Warunge, through their kitchen window, preparing supper. He then proceeded to light a plastic paraffin bag and placed it on the kitchen door to attract his mother's attention to come out. The mother, Anne Warunge, saw fire from the kitchen window and got curious to what was happening outside. When she got outside, she saw the burning bag, and while she was wondering who could have done the heinous act, Lawrence once again struck her with the metal bar on her head. As she turned around in pain, as blood oozed out from her head to see who it was, Lawrence, in the same fashion, pounced on her and stabbed her 17 times, and finally ended it by slitting her throat. Christian, Lawrence's cousin, heard the commotion from the kitchen and went to see what was happening. Only on reaching, he found Lawrence on top of his mother, stabbing her. Christian, while shocked, ran towards his room, raising an alarm, and hid himself under the bed. At that time, Lawrence's dad, Nicholas, was in his bedroom getting ready for supper when he heard the commotion coming from downstairs. When he opened his door, he saw Lawrence standing in the hallway carrying a knife and his clothes covered in blood. The dad then knew something was off and tried to run back to his room to lock it. But unfortunately, Lawrence was fast enough and pushed the door before it was locked, making his dad fall backwards. The dad still stood up and rushed towards his balcony and jumped to escape his death, but unluckily broke his ankle from the fall, spraining it, incapacitating him on the floor. As he crawled towards the gate to call for help, Lawrence followed him hurriedly, and it was recorded from the post-mortem results that his son, Lawrence, had stabbed him 34 times. Lawrence then went back to the house and entered his younger brother, Maxwell, and got him. His brother was in his room as the events of murder were happening all along. Lawrence, with no show of remorse or reluctance, also stabbed him to death and proceeded to his final victim, his cousin Christian, where he found him hidden under the bed. Later, when Lawrence was being questioned by the police, he narrated that his cousin Christian, who was barely 10 years old at the time, had knelt down before him, begging him not to kill him. The boy's cries didn't even move him a bit, as Lawrence proceeded to deal him the same fate he'd handed to the rest of his family members. He stabbed him and slit his throat in the same manner. Lawrence then continued searching the house to kill his two sisters, who luckily had left for boarding school, thus not coming back anytime soon. The cold-hearted Lawrence then went and took a shower and removed his stained, blooded clothes, went and ate the food prepared by his mother. He then turned off the lights in the compound so that people could know they were asleep. The police later came knocking on their gate as James Kinyanjui, the first murder victim's body, was found dead by one of his co-workers and alarmed the police.
Tulifunga kazi 5, mimi nikatokea. Kurudi nilikuwa narudi around saa 3. Kapata mwenzangu ameuliwa hapo. Yeah.
So ulipigia nani simu kwanza?
Nipigia boss wangu. Hadi akakuja na afisa wa polisi.
Lawrence didn't open their gate and the police assumed they had slept or no one was there and left. Lawrence then headed to sleep on his parents' bed. In the aftermath of the massacre, Lawrence attempted to cover his tracks by staging the crime scene to make it appear as though the murders were the work of unidentified assailants. In the morning, Lawrence packed his killing tools, his clothes that were stained with blood, and headed to a nearby town, and boarded a bus to another nearby town to dump them in an attempt to hide the evidence. He then headed towards his girlfriend's place but didn't find her. He then proceeded to his uncle, where he narrated to him what he had done. His uncle, not believing what the boy was telling him, told him to surrender himself and take account of his crimes. The uncle then called the police and they came for him. His family's dead bodies were later found badly mutilated by their neighbors, who had later forced themselves in the Warunge's compound after one of them peeped through a gap in the gate and saw the dad's body, Nicholas Warunge's body, lying by the driveway.
Kajaribu gonga for some minutes, ndio nikaona kuna mahali naweza chungulia mwanya. Kuchungulia kwenye mwanya, ndio nikaona hiyo brother-in-law amelala hapo chini. Sasa ndio tukajua kumbe hata hii kitu ilikuwa inaendelea huko, bado ilikuwa inaendelea pande ile nyingine. Sasa tukaraise alarm, maneiba wakakuja, tukajaribu tukavunja. Huyo rafiki alikuwa amenileta akavunja, akaingia ndani akaniambia hata huko ndani damu imejaa.
When taken to the court, Lawrence first denied being guilty until when his girlfriend, Sarah Muthoni, was brought in as his accomplice. Lawrence then admitted to doing the murders alone and how it occurred. The girlfriend, Sarah Muthoni, mentioned that Lawrence had earlier on, a few days prior to committing the murders, instructed her to buy him 2 knives, but she didn't know what he was going to use them for.
Lawrence Warunge, who was detained last Friday, was presented in court where investigators were given 14 more days to allow further investigations to conclude their probe.
From the time that we arrested the respondents, the time has been insufficient to enable us to conclude investigations, Your Honor. We are still in the process of recovering more exhibits, Your Honor.
After his arrest last Friday, he confessed to the incident and led police to a residence in Mai Mahiu area on Saturday, where they recovered the killer weapon, a kitchen knife, piece of clothes, shoes, and a piece of paper. He had thrown the exhibits to a pit latrine.
As the news of the gruesome murders spread like wildfire, the entire nation was gripped by shock and disbelief. How could such a brutal act occur within the confines of a seemingly ordinary family home? The investigation into the Lawrence Warunge case revealed chilling details about the events leading up to the murders. It was alleged that Lawrence meticulously planned the killings over a period of time, 3 months, they said, driven by simmering resentment and a desire for financial gain. Reportedly, he harbored grievances against his family, including disputes over inheritance and disagreements regarding his academic pursuits. As the Lawrence Warunge case unfolded, the nation grappled with profound questions about the nature of violence, mental health, and the breakdown of familial bonds. The tragedy served as a sobering reminder of the fragility of human relationships and the capacity for evil that lurks within the human psyche. In the ensuing legal proceedings, Lawrence Warunge faced multiple charges, including 5 counts of murder. His trial captivated the nation, drawing widespread media attention and sparking intense debate about the root causes of such senseless violence. Ultimately, Lawrence Warunge's case served as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked rage and resentment. It cast a long shadow over the community of Kiambu, his hometown area, leaving scars that would take years to heal. As the wheels of justice turned, the nation watched with bated breath, grappling with the uncomfortable truth that sometimes the most heinous crimes are committed by those closest to us. However, 3 years on, the case is yet to be finalized.